Hello and welcome to my October reading wrap-up. I have this lovely stack of books here that I read that seem like quite a reasonable amount for the month, and then a bunch of ebooks and audiobooks. I think I read 19 books in October. I don't know what happened. I got really into the Kate Daniels series by Ilona Andrews. That's what happened. I will talk about those books at the end because I read a great many of them. Much like last month, for whatever reason, I've been terrible at updating Goodreads reviews, so I have Goodreads reviews for exactly none of these books, which is fine. It just means this is going to be a much more scattered wrap-up than I have done in the past because I have 0 notes, and I promise that come November I will have all of my Goodreads reviews done and I will know what I'm talking about. But let's just get into this and hope that I can remember some of these books, because I don't know, I read everything this month. The first book that I read in October was The Heartbeat of Trees by Peter Wohlleben. This is a nonfiction book about trees. He is a forester, I think, in Germany. He's German. The book is translated. This is nonfiction. I gave it 4 stars. It's a very interesting book about just like kind of vague sciencey things. Like, he clearly knows a lot about trees. He's very into trees. I am not particularly into trees, but I did enjoy the audiobook quite a bit, and like I really liked the narrator. I thought it was very interesting to listen to. I learned a lot, but I'm not really sure how much I retained from that book. I think that's more of a me issue than a book issue because I'm not very into sciencey things. My brain does not grasp science well, but I do every so often try to read a sciencey book just to, like, I don't know, educate myself. But I do think this book is very much geared towards people like me who do not know sciencey things. Like, he is writing this for a very general audience of people who have very limited knowledge, which I appreciated, because like I recognize that a lot of people wouldn't want to be talked down to in a science book, but that's kind of what I require. I would recommend this if you're interested in, you know, trees, sciencey things. He kind of has, like, I wouldn't call them articles because it is just like a singular book, but each chapter is kind of like a short chapter with a different topic, and he kind of talks about things that relate to trees, that relate to conservationism, that relate to like how we as humans treat the environment in the 21st century, and things that we think are good that aren't really good, and then like what we can kind of do to advocate. It was very interesting, very worthwhile. I do wish I'd gotten like a little bit more out of it than I did, but I think that is very much a me issue, not a book issue, but I did really enjoy it. Then I read Sex Cult Nun by Faith Jones, Breaking Away from the Children of God, a wild, radical religious cult. This is Faith Jones' memoir. She grew up in the Children of God cult in the, I forget the decade, I don't know. So she grew up largely in China. Her father was the son of the cult's leader, her grandfather, and I don't know, culty things happened. I didn't know anything about this cult going in, and I kind of left this feeling like I still didn't know tons about the cult. It's very much more her memoir and her experiences than like a cult story. I gave this 3 stars. It was fine. It was interesting. It was a decent memoir. It focuses a lot on her childhood, and I do feel like for books about cults, I'm either looking for a very like journalism type book that's kind of about like the cult as a whole, or I'm looking for like after the cult, like how you cope with things, how you come back to the world, like etc, etc. Like, that's kind of what I would be interested in cult. And this was kind of just like what it was like to her growing up in this cult where like so many things, so much abuse is normalized, and that was just like what her childhood was like. That was just how she saw the world, because she didn't have any other normal, really. And it was really interesting to see her perspective. I would give a warning for this book. There's a lot of child sex abuse, which I feel like if you're reading a book about a cult, I feel like that's kind of assumed, but it did feel like that was the main purpose of this cult. It wasn't just like a feature of the cult, it was kind of like, this is why we are a cult. So there was a lot of that. which was a lot to read, to be perfectly honest. Hello, Splurt. And it was interesting. Towards the end, she kind of got into a little more like motivational speaker, self-helpy types things, because I do think she is a motivational speaker now. I think she has like, I forget what she called it, but she has like a program she does where she comes and like does speeches or TED Talks or whatever, and I wasn't super interested in that aspect of it. Like, that's just really not my thing. I mean, good for her for like making the most of her life and like moving on from this and like empowering herself and other women. I think that's like the goal of her motivational speeches. I don't know. But that really just wasn't my thing, and it kind of like, the final sections of the book were kind of like building towards that, and it was a little bit like but it was a decent book. Like, if you're interested in a memoir of a child growing up in a cult, like, this is gonna give you exactly what you want. I think it was well written and interesting. Then I read Faithless by Karin Slaughter, which is book 5 in the Grant County series. This book is a thriller series that centers around Dr. Sarah Linton, who is the town pediatrician and also coroner, and her ex-husband slash boyfriend slash husband, in that order, Jeffrey Tolliver, who's the chief of police. And I don't know, it's a cop thriller series. They solve crimes that are particularly horrific. This book is about a young girl who was buried alive and also has some kind of like religious culty undertones. Not super explicit, but it's definitely present, and I think I would have enjoyed that aspect of the book more had I not read this immediately after Sex Cult Nun, but that's fine. That was just kind of like a little bit of unfortunate timing, but I did still really enjoy this book a lot. I wouldn't say it was my favorite of the series, but it's very entertaining, it's very well written, it held my attention the whole time. Like, 4 stars. Like, I really enjoyed this. I do think of Karin Slaughter's books, this one is not going to be a standout for me. Like, my unfortunate reaction to Karin Slaughter is that I love her books so much that I give this 4 stars. I don't give that many thrillers 4 stars, and I've never given a thriller 5 stars. And my like excitement towards it is tempered because it's just like, this wasn't an amazing favorite book ever type of read, which is kind of what I always want Karin Slaughter to be. But I really did enjoy this. Like, this is definitely like one of the better books in the series. I don't know. It was a really good book. Would I recommend it? Yes, I'd recommend the whole series. So like, if you're reading the series, for sure this is a good one. I don't know. It's hard to talk about series books when I'm just like, yeah, like, it's a great series, the book is good. So yeah, it was really good. Then I listened to The Dead Are Rising by Payne and Tamara Payne. This is a biography of Malcolm X. I gave it 4 stars. It's a biography of Malcolm X. Like, it's just really in-depth and detailed about his life from like pre-birth. Talks about his parents and like how they came to be through his whole childhood. And I think it takes you like a third of the way through the book before you like get to his teenage years even. It was very interesting and very well done. I would highly recommend if you want to read a book about Malcolm X, because I went into this not knowing very much about him. That's why I read it. I was just like curious because like, I live in America and I really don't know much about Malcolm X apart from just like vague, who he is. And this really went in depth on like his childhood and how his childhood shaped him and shaped his adult self and his advocacy and like who he was and like his joining the Nation of Islam cult. And it was very, very interesting. And I mean, like, he read an interesting life, so I feel like any biography about Malcolm X is going to be interesting just by default. But I do feel like the writing in this was just astounding. Like, it was so good. Like, Payne, his word choice, like, I was just sitting there, like, listening to his word choice and just, like, it was so precise and intentional. Like, every single word. It was, like, wonderful. Like, I just got so excited. And I looked him up, and he doesn't really have any other books. Like, he was a journalist, so I could go look up some of his journalism and read that. But, like, this was absolutely fantastic. It was so well written. It was so interesting. It just flew by. And now I know a lot about Malcolm X. It did kind of make me want to read his autobiography, because Les Payne talked a lot about his autobiography and like discussed like the things that Malcolm X had talked about in it and the things he hadn't brought up, like some very important things and like some disagreements that like Les Payne had with the autobiography in the way that Malcolm X was discussing things, which was very interesting. And the other reason I wanted to read it was because I don't feel like this book focused very much on Malcolm X's beliefs and his views and like what he was fighting for. Like, not that that wasn't a part of the book. Like, you can't write a book about him without having like his general beliefs in it. But it just like wasn't very integral to the story. It was very much just like about his life and the events that happened and like point A to point B. And I don't know, I really kind of felt like that was missing a little bit. Like, not as a failure of the book. I don't think Les Payne was trying to write that at all. But just for me, as someone who knows very little about him, I did wind up with like some more questions that I was very curious about. So, highly, highly recommend. This was fantastic. A Tree Grows in Brooklyn by Betty Smith. I also gave this 4 stars. This is about a young girl growing up at the turn of the 20th century in Brooklyn. And like, it's just about, much like the Malcolm X biography, it's just about like her parents getting together and then her childhood and just like kind of everything that happened to her. And it's a very quiet, lovely kind of book. Like, things happen. I don't want to sit here and be like, wow, nothing happened in this book. Like, she just kind of went to school and went home. But like, it kind of is like that. Like, she kind of went to school and she went home and like there were major events that happened, but it's not written in a sort of like narrative with those events propelling the story. It's kind of just like this very quiet day in the life. And like, exciting things happen to her because like exciting events happen to everyone, no matter how like peripheral it is to your life. But like, it wasn't really plot driven at all. It was just like this young girl's life, and it was so lovely and so quiet and like kind of wholesome. And like, it's definitely sad. Like, it has its sad bits, but like life kind of has its sad bits, and it has, happy bits too, and like it has struggles and triumphs, and it's just like kind of life. This is apparently very much inspired by Betty Smith's life and childhood, and it's just such an interesting read. Like, it's definitely like a quiet, slow kind of book, so it's definitely not for everyone, but I loved it so much. It was just the kind of book where you can just kind of like melt into it and enjoy the experience. And like, I understand why this is a classic, and like I could see myself rereading this in the future. It was really, really wonderful. And then I read Exhalation by Ted Chiang, which is a short story collection, a science fiction short story collection that's kind of like speculative and dystopic in some ways. I gave this 4 stars. I had to return it to the library because unfortunately I waited until the very last minute of the very last renewal that I had in order to get this read. But it was great. Like, Ted Chiang is just as good as everyone says he is. His stories are very, very interesting. He talks a lot about agency and what it means to be human and language. And like, those are kind of the 3 themes that felt like they tied together all of the stories. Or maybe not all of them, but like, those seem to be like the 3 major ideas that he really liked playing with in speculative stories. Just like what it means to be human and how like language plays into that, and like at what point are you human and do you have agents. And like, it was so interesting. All of these stories, well, most of them were really good. I would say the majority of them were 4-star stories for me. There were a couple that I didn't really care about, but that's fine. In collections, there's usually at least 1 or 2 that aren't favorites for me. There's 2 things I kind of struggled with. The first was his writing style. It wasn't my favorite. He creates kind of a distance from the reader. Like, you don't feel like you're in these people's heads. You don't feel like you're experiencing what they're experiencing. And I think it works. I think it's very intentional. Like, it's a choice he's made to write like this, and it works very well for his stories. It's just not my favorite. And then my other issue was kind of just that, like, as much as I enjoyed all of these stories in the moment, I felt like they faded really fast. Like, a lot faster than short stories I really enjoyed would. Because I would read one and be like, wow, that was so interesting, and like pause for 5 minutes, and like then it would just be like kind of gone, you know? Like I would stop thinking about it, and like the details would kind of fade. And I kind of wish they'd stuck with me more than they did. But it was really good. I'll definitely read more from him because I think he was a very interesting writer. He has a lot of good ideas, and just like his stories were all very compelling. So definitely would recommend him, and definitely will read him more in the future. Then I listened to When They Call You a Terrorist, a Black Lives Matter memoir by Patrisse Khan-Cullors and Asha Bandele. This is a memoir, as the title would suggest, about one of the women who created the Black Lives Matter movement. It was very interesting. I gave it 4 stars. I like memoirs. I like hearing about people's lives. I do think this book was kind of like 2 separate halves, though. The first half was about her childhood, and I think this half was fantastic. Like, this was so well done. Like, the way she discussed her childhood and the issues in her childhood, and the way she tied that into systemic oppression, and kind of how the two came together, like, so seamlessly. Like, it's a perfect illustration of, like, how systemic issues create so many problems in communities. And it was just like masterfully done. It was so good. Like, I really loved that half. And then the second half was fine. Like, it was a lot more about like her adult life and her advocacy, and how she got into the Black Lives Matter movement, or I mean like how she came to create the Black Lives Matter movement, and kind of what that meant for her, and like the different things that they did. And it was very interesting to hear about like some of the behind the scenes of that, and also like her continued life. But it just didn't have the same meaning that the first half did for me. Like, it wasn't bad by any means, it was fine, but like the first half was so fantastic and like absolutely gripping, and like it mattered so much, and like had so many ideas that were very important. And then the second half kind of just felt like, well, this is just what is happening, and like here's what it is. And I don't know, I felt that was like a little bit unfortunate. Like, it was still 4-star, like fantastic, like genuinely recommend, because I think there's so much that you can learn from this. But yeah, it did kind of like lose me a little towards the end. And then I read Beyond Reach by Karin Slaughter, which is book 6, the final book in the Grant County series. Once again about Dr. Sarah Linton and her husband Jeffrey Tolliver, chief of police. This is largely about a Nazi group. Yay, fun. We love white supremacist thrillers. Very dark. Lots of bad things happened in this book. Essentially, one of Jeffrey's detectives kind of gets involved in this white supremacist group and a murder that occurs. Not involved like she's part of the group, but involved like she's trying to investigate them because it hit kind of close to home, and she's trying to keep Jeffrey and Sarah out of it. And like, she's kind of a screw up throughout the series, so it goes terribly, and like everyone winds up involved, and there's like bombs going off, and like corruption throughout the police department and the community, and it's just like absolutely wild and fantastic. And this was maybe my favorite book of the series. It was so good. Like, it was just like from start to finish, I was enthralled. Like, this is what I want from a Karin Slaughter book. This is what I wanted from the series. It was such a good conclusion, and it was just like an absolutely wild ride. So brutal, but like, it couldn't have ended any better than this. Like, I don't think this book could have been any better than it was. I adored it. It has multiple timelines, which will sometimes bother me in a book, but it didn't here, because like it made sense, and like all the timelines were super compelling, and they all wove together very smoothly, and it was such a good book. Like, oh, I love this. Like, this was just like ending on the perfect note. Like, the final page of this book, if you've read it, you know, perfection, absolutely flawless. I love Karin Slaughter for that. So highly recommend this whole series if you really like brutal cop thrillers, because this was this was a fantastic one, and this was a fantastic book, and it brought me a great deal of joy. Then I read Jennifer Capriati by Ellen Emerson White. This is a children's biography of Jennifer Capriati that was published in 1991 when she was 14, so it's kind of an odd little book. I didn't rate this because I am very clearly not the audience, I had never heard of Jennifer Capriati. She's a tennis player. She was a professional tennis player. She has since retired, but she went professional when she was like 13, even though the rules said you had to be 14, which I'm still a little bit unclear on that. But this is just like, it's about her. Like, this was written when she was 14. It's her biography. And like from 91, so like it's very out of date, and I'm not the target audience. But Ellen Emerson White is my favorite author, and I'm like trying to read all of her books, even the ones like this, and it's like well written. It was an interesting book. Like, I learned a lot about her, and I actually wound up googling her a fair bit, just because, like, you know, this kind of stopped when she was 14, so she had a whole life and career after this book. But it was an interesting read. It was an odd perspective, because I've never read a biography like that that's like, you know, so wildly out of date and so like minimal on like information on their life, because like it just cuts off so soon. Like, she's in her 40s now, I think. It was very, very interesting. I did think it was kind of funny, just like because of the age and the timing of this. A lot of this book was talking about like tennis player burnout, because that's apparently a thing. I know nothing about professional tennis, but like that's apparently a problem that a lot of tennis players have, especially when they go pro so young. And she was talking about Jennifer Capriati and how like she has a really great mindset, so like burnout's probably not going to be a problem for her. And like immediately after this book was published, she took like a year and a half off professional tennis and like got in trouble for drugs and shoplifting and had like a really bad time, and like got her life together and like went back to playing professionally. But like it was just really funny. I've got a couple more of these biographies to read, and I don't think I'm gonna rate any of them. They're just like 80 pages, super quick, but like interesting and well written. Just, you know, I'm not the audience. And then I read O Caledonia by Elspeth Barker, which is a gothic young adult book about a young girl in Scotland who is murdered when she's 16, and this book tells the tragic story of her short life, and it's kind of just her life. It does sound kind of similar to A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, but where I found that book really lovely and compelling, I just struggled to get into this one. I give it 3 stars. It wasn't a bad book by any means, but I did just struggle to care. And I think this is one that I would have connected to a lot more as a teenager, because as a teenager, I would have found the main character in this, Janet, very relatable, because she likes to read. She's very much an outsider and an outcast, and she's, you know, bullied and mocked, and like her interests are like weird and not in the mainstream. And like as a 15-year-old, I would have read this and been like, yes, me, 100%. As an adult, I'm like, wow, she's kind of an immature brat, which like she's 16, she's supposed to be. But I do think relating to her would have made this much more compelling, and like it would have made this book matter in a way that like as an adult I don't really care. My other main issue was that I did feel like it was overwritten. Like there would be whole paragraphs where I would read the paragraph and it's just like, what is that saying? That's saying nothing. And it frustrated me. I think if you like the writing style, because I do get how people would think this is very lyrical and beautiful. It just like wasn't really my thing. If you like the writing style, that will absolutely make this book for you, and I can see why people would fall in love. It just wasn't my thing, and I do feel like you have to like the writing style, because so much of this book just relies on the writing pushing it forward, and it wasn't my thing. I found it a little bit annoying, but mostly it was fine. Like it was a 3-star, like perfectly fine. We'll probably never think about it again read. And then I read Killers of the Flower Moon, The Osage Murders, and the Birth of the FBI by David Grann, which I gave 4 stars. The movie just came out, so I feel like a lot of people know what this book is about. But this is a nonfiction true crime book about the Osage killings in the 1920s. Essentially, the Osage tribe were, as most Native American tribes were, pushed off their land by the government several times into just increasingly worse land until they were stuck on this tiny, terrible reservation. Only, come to find out several years later, that that reservation was sitting on tons of oil. So they had land rights to all of the, you know, minerals and whatever under the land. So they all became incredibly rich in like the 1920s, which led to a lot of white people murdering them for their money. Because like when I say incredibly rich, I'm talking about millions of dollars in 1920 money. Like not present day millions of dollars, but like 1920 $1 million. And it was just horrific, like what happened to them. He talked about the death rate and how the death rate of the Osage community was almost twice the death rate of the average population because of all the murders that were taking place. And he specifically focused on like one killer and like one group of killings like that centered around the family. But he also talked about it in a broad sense of like it wasn't just this one group of killings that was happening. It was widespread throughout the whole community, like for decades, and it was so horrific to read. I think things I struggled with in this book, I think the first section, David Grann was trying too hard to be Truman Capote, which I don't think he's A, succeeded very well at, and B, I don't really like Capote all that much anyway, so that wasn't my favorite. And I've read David Grann before, and that's not really what he sounds like. And then I feel like as the book went along, his voice got stronger, and like the second and third section, especially the third section, were really, really well done. It was just like a little bit slow to get into, but this is a great work of research in history, and I do feel like it's an important story to know, because like as an American, this is my history. Like this is what people were doing to the Native Americans, and like it happened to this one particular tribe, but like it would have happened to any other people of color at the time had they had the same kind of money that the Osage did. And it was just so horrifically sad and terrible, and I don't know, it's just all about like the corruption and the murders and like the trauma it inflicted on this community, and it's fantastic. Like I would highly recommend. Haven't seen the movie, don't have any thoughts on that, not sure that I will see the movie, but I really, really loved the book. So that was like 10 of the books that I read this month, which brings me to the final thing that I read, which is, I think, 9 books from the Kate Daniel series by Ilona Andrews. 8 or 9. I kind of just got into these books. I read the first 2 in, I think, July. Over the summer, I read the first 2, and they were fun. Like, I gave them, I think, 3 and 4 stars, respectively. Like, not my favorite reads. They were fun. Meant to continue, never did, because my library didn't have physical copies. So then I just read the ebooks, and I had, like, one slow day at work this month, so I was like, I'll read an ebook at work. And then I just didn't stop reading them. So I read books 3 through 9, and then book like 5.5 or something, which is a spin-off that focuses on another character. All novels. This series has a lot of novellas and a couple of other spin-offs, and I only read the one. It was my least favorite of the series. So I was like, I'm just not gonna read anymore. I'll just focus on like the main books. But I'm gonna talk about these in vague, because I'm not gonna sit here and try to discuss 8 different books that I read consecutively that focus on the same characters and stories. Like, I truly cannot tell them apart. But I will say, all the books ranged from 3 to 5 stars. I would average the series at 4. One of the books got 5 stars because I had a particularly good time with it, and that was Magic Rises. I should describe the series. The Kate Daniels series is an urban fantasy series that centers around Kate Daniels, who is a mercenary who works to kill or control or save people. You know, it's magic has come back to Atlanta, essentially, and it comes in waves, and like weird things are happening, and people aren't fully used to magic yet because it just came back in like the previous generation, and there are still people who remember what life was like before magic, and it's a very interesting world and cool magic system. It's a little weird, but like I think it's mostly just weird because like I don't read urban fantasies. This is not my genre, and everything was just like absolutely wild. And it also has like a decent romantic subplot. These aren't romance novels, but they do have a very heavy romantic subplot where the main character, Kate Daniels, falls in love with the alpha of the shapeshifter clan, which is a little like, there's a lot of like shapeshifter stereotypical cliche stuff going in. Like they have alphas, like it's very much like possessive jealousy stuff going on. I didn't love that, but the characters in them are all really fun, and you get into Kate's backstory a lot. Like her father is like this all-powerful murdering dude who's like into some stuff, and you kind of find that out as the series goes along. And then each book is kind of episodic, where like it's all building to a specific place, but each book is kind of like about a different big bad, and it really reminded me like a TV show. It was really fun. Would recommend. So to get to the specifics, the fifth book, the sixth book, Magic Rises was somewhere in there. That was my favorite of the series and the only one that got 5 stars, because they go to Europe, and every single other book in this series takes place at least like 90% in Atlanta. The Atlanta setting is very important to the books, which is interesting. Funnily enough, Karin Slaughter also sets a lot of her books in Atlanta, so I've been reading about a lot of Atlanta stuff lately. But in this book, they decide to go to Europe and mess with some random stuff that has nothing to do with anything. There's some shapeshifter clans in Europe who are having a little petty fight over who knows what, and who really cares. It doesn't matter. And this book was just the absolute most ridiculous, over the top. None of their motivations made sense. It was like so bad it's good kind of vibes, but also at the same time, it was like genuinely really good, because I really like the characters and the writing's fun, and like that book was a fantastic time. My least favorite book of the series was the spinoff Gunmetal Magic. It was like book 5.5 or something. Didn't love that one. It just like didn't hit the same notes for me as the rest of the series. Like it was a little bit like awkward. Like it just didn't like flow right, and none of the characters felt as real or as important to me, which was odd because I really liked the main character of that book right up until that book, and then I didn't like her for the rest of the series, which I don't know if her character changed or if that book changed how I saw her, but I was really into her until then, and then I was kind of like checked out. The rest of the books were 3 or 4 stars. Some of them were really great, some of them were just fun. Good series. Overall, pros and cons. Pros, it's very, very fun. It's a quick, easy read. It's fun. I like the characters a lot. I like the magic a lot. I like the world a lot. So, like, good vibes. Cons, I felt like at times the main character is like a little bit too snarky. And I like her snarky. It just felt like it was a little bit like, I had a tendency to go for like too much. Like, too like cutesy almost, you know, and it's like a little bit too over the top, and like I felt like they could have taken like a step back on like almost all the snark, just like tone it down slightly. I also felt like the climaxes were frequently rushed. There was more than once that I would be reading the book and be like, wow, like things are really ramping up, we're gonna get to like a good climax soon, and then realize there were, you know, 18 pages left in the book, and 5 of those were the epilogue, and it was like, the climax hasn't even begun yet, you know? And there were a few times like that. And like I said earlier, the romance. I like the romance. I like the relationship that she has with the male main lead, but I just wish it didn't have like a lot of those shapeshifter cliches. That's just kind of like what it is. But I like their personalities a lot, and I like them as a couple, and like kind of how they work together. So like pros and cons there, but like it's a really fun series. I had a good time. I still have 1 book left because I kind of felt myself getting burned out, like reading so many of these books in a row. Like they're so fun and such a good time, and then by the time I was reading like the last one, it took a bit of a slight turn, and I just didn't like the change of direction as much as I liked what it was doing before, but I also think I was just getting burnt out. So I do have 1 more book left. I'm gonna quickly go over the books that I read because I do have them listed here, and I will put like all the covers up for y'all. Magic Strikes, Magic Bleeds, Magic Slays, Gunmetal Magic, Magic Rises, Magic Breaks, and Magic Shifts. And the book I have left to read is Magic Triumphs, but I would highly recommend the Kate Daniel series. Interesting urban fantasy. I had a really good time, and it was a super fun series, and would recommend. So that was everything that I read in October. I'm going to try to edit this video down because I'm at like 45 minutes now. But yes, thank you so much for watching. Let me know down below if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them if you have. And as always, I will see y'all again soon.